It was back in '03. The plan was to make it to Vancouver from Calgary overnight, 1,000 kilometers of driving through the majestic Rocky Mountains. Back then, some of the roads weren't as developed, and certain points along the stretch could prove to be seriously risky. Any rational person would have waited, but I was young and reckless. My only focus was on the mind-blowing Plaid Bandana concert that would be taking place in exactly 24 hours. I had waited for years to see them. After Vince Stricklet broke up, I never thought I would get a chance to see them play. I was ecstatic when I heard they were forming a new group with a new singer. Well, not just any singer. It was Blake Blackington from Leather Hammer. Their album was called an instant classic, and as soon as I heard they were going on tour, I camped for hours outside the ticket seller. Unfortunately, nobody I knew was into the group, so I was making the trip alone. I had been studying the maps all day at work. You have to remember, in '03, we didn't all have cell phones and GPS, and was confident it would be smooth sailing. People on the message boards just said to watch out for trucks and make sure to refill, as gas stations could be few and far between. I packed light and headed out. I would only be gone for a couple of nights. I didn't even bring a change of clothes. I stopped and grabbed some burgers and filled up a 1-liter flask with black coffee. My car was an old Japanese import from the '80s, but it had never failed me. I brought every Plaid Bandana and Vince Stricklet cassette and CD I had. Their discography would be enough to get me through the night. I glanced at the city lights in my rearview mirror as they faded into darkness. Plaid Bandana's first album blared in the background. I was probably driving too fast. The cool night air whirled around me through the crack in the driver's side window. The stars were out, and traffic on the road was sparse. It was basically smooth sailing, at least for the first few hours or so. I started thinking about how remote it really was out there. I mean, I was safe in my car, but what if my car failed? I was in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the woods, in the midst of the Rocky Mountains. I didn't have a phone or pager, and the cars that passed were getting fewer and fewer. Then, as if on cue, the lights in the vehicle started to flicker. At first, they only turned off for a second, almost unnoticeable, then again, and rapidly. Finally, the entire vehicle shut off. You have got to be kidding me. I quickly shifted into neutral to try and coast down the downhill stretch I was on, all the while trying to restart the ignition. It wouldn't give. I steered the vehicle onto the shoulder in disbelief, slammed the steering wheel in anger, and got out of the car. My voice echoed through the mountains, taunting me, my curse reverberating back to me. Clouds had rolled in, and it was dark out. I quickly realized that just because there was a paved road didn't mean I wasn't alone in the woods at 1 a.m, encircled by remote wilderness. The last town was an hour back, and the next one was probably a 4-hour walk. I stared into the deep woods surrounding me on all sides, ears straining at every twig snapping or leaf rustling, warily anticipating a cougar to pounce from the brush at any moment. I wasn't going to make it to the show. I would have to wait until tomorrow and get towed to the nearest shop. The whole trip was a wash. I popped the hood and looked over the internals, but nothing seemed out of sorts. I put my hands on my head and walked defeatedly. Suddenly, I was jolted out of my absent-minded self-pity as a massive 18-wheeler whizzed past, the gust of wind nearly knocking me over, my knees weak from almost being turned into pavement pate. "Hey! Watch it!" I screamed as it zoomed off over the crest of the hill. Why didn't he stop to help? How did I not hear or see him? I was shaking from the adrenaline. How stupid could I be? I was in black jeans and a black leather jacket. He probably didn't even see me. Suddenly, my car started up. My jaw dropped. I was confused because I didn't even turn the ignition on, but I wasn't about to question the inner workings of vehicle mechanics. I hopped back in, ecstatic. The record that was playing resumed at full blast. I was in disbelief, but in my excitement, I didn't question how weird it was. I just put my foot on the gas and made up for the time I had lost. It was only about another half an hour or so when I saw it. Road closed due to construction. Please use Forest Service road detour in 100 meter for next 1 kilometers for reroute. What? I said in shock. Route detour? Forest Service road? Out here? I had no other option. I had no idea if my vehicle would break down again, but I was also running low on gas and wouldn't make it to that last station if I turned around. I tried to make out the map in the little moonlight there was. I couldn't see the FSR on my map, but I looked over the geography and figured if it was only 1 kilometer, it was probably fine. What other option did I have? Give up? Park here and wait and miss the show? It would be unreasonable. I apprehensively slowed as I approached the roadblocks and turned off onto the dirt road. Flagging tape on the trees marked the route. I looked into the utter blackness that surrounded me. It was almost hypnotizing. How long had I been driving? Surely it had been 1 kilometer by now. In the corner of my field of view, I could see something in the dark, but every time I turned to try and catch a glimpse of it, it would disappear. I was starting to get paranoid. I needed to get out of this section of road and fast. I started to worry. Did I miss a turn? I no longer saw any tape on the trees. Out of nowhere, like a flash, I thought I saw a tattered man with a lantern and old-time clothes. It was so quick, it was almost imperceptible. I slammed on the brakes and looked around the vehicle. There was no one. Was I losing it? Thankfully then, I saw a break in the woods and light up ahead. It was the exit. I re-entered the roadway, relieved I was out of the engulfing black of the woods. Did I just imagine that figure? The relief was short-lived. The road felt different. Nothing tangible, but nonetheless, it just felt different. The road was climbing, higher and higher. Suddenly, a dense fog seemed to roll in out of nowhere. Then I noticed the guardrail had vanished. No guardrail on a foggy mountain pass. The road also seemed to be getting narrower. I flipped off the music to focus as I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. I could hardly see a foot in front of the vehicle. I set the emergency brake and looked at the map again. There was no way this was the condition of the road. This was supposed to be a main road. This didn't make any sense. I drove painstakingly along the death trap of a road, inching along meter by meter. Suddenly, I saw some rocks roll down the mountain wall in front of me. I thought about turning back, but there was no way I could reverse here. Another group of rocks, or more so boulders, rolled down the face of the cliff to my left across the road, and then off the other side into the foggy oblivion to my right. I miscalculated and, in my error, twitched and drove over a large stone. The entire vehicle jerked towards the edge of the cliff. No! I screamed at the top of my lungs, tears forming. All I could think was, not like this. Not like this. Surely my mistake had cost me my life. I closed my eyes as I felt the tires roll off the ledge and the undercarriage scrape along the stone. A sensation of falling. Thwack! I was still screaming as I felt myself slam downward into my seat. I opened my eyes, my vehicle at a standstill, engine idling, the fluorescent road signs ahead of me reflecting my headlights. Road work. Drive with caution. I was back at the detour, except this time there were no roadblocks. I looked at myself in the mirror and pinched myself. Was I dreaming? There was no way. I had been drinking coffee and blaring music the entire drive, but I must have slipped off to sleep. There was no other explanation. I felt my entire body shiver. It had been all too real. For the next hour, I drove in utter silence, finally snapping out of it as I heard the sound of ambulance sirens approaching. Several trucks whizzed past in the direction I had just come from. In tow, a police cruiser. He was driving the opposite way, but his lights flashed and he slowed, indicating for me to pull over. I was too despondent to wonder why. I turned the crank on my door and rolled the window down as he slowly sauntered over, his boots clacking along the pavement. His hand rested on his firearm casually, slowly mashing the piece of gum he was chewing on. He stood outside my door in silence for a few uncomfortable seconds. I greeted him and asked if everything was all right. I still remember what he said to this day. Yep. Okay. The reason I stopped you is because, well, I just wanted to remind you to drive safe out here. About half an hour that way was a serious accident. A semi-truck was going too fast and rammed a car off the side of the road into the gorge. We don't expect there are any survivors. He paused and took a breath. Just keep your eyes peeled. We don't need 2 wrecks in the same night. I mustered up a thank you and wished him a good night, watching as his taillights faded into the distance. Was it the speeding truck from earlier? With what had happened with that dream and now hearing about the accident, I felt horrible. The rest of the drive was a blur. I went to the show later that day. It was great. They played all their hits and the new album, but still, I couldn't really enjoy it. The entire time, thoughts of what happened in that dream and the accident were in the back of my mind. It was disconcerting how real it felt. Was it an adrenaline crash from the near accident with the truck? I wasn't really looking forward to the drive back, but when I did, I kept my eyes peeled during that stretch of road. I scanned for any sign of a detour or a road similar to the one I had taken in my dream, delusional as it was. I found nothing. However, I did notice a set of crosses along the highway, presumably where the accident the police officer had mentioned took place. A cold sweat washed over me. Glancing at the memorial, it seemed to be for the trucker who had passed that night. It was all too strange. I made it home in one piece. For whatever reason, after that trip, I didn't really enjoy driving anymore. It's not like I won't ever drive, but I ride the bus or walk when I can. I know it's irrational, but I sort of developed an aversion to it, however illogical that may be. But I know this isn't a psychology forum, it is just what it is. The thing is, the reason I was reminded of this story, and I'm telling it now, is because recently I was driving. It was foggy, and I came upon some road construction, and it all flooded back to me. So when I got home, I decided to do some research. I almost didn't believe it, but what I found made me feel sick. The area I had driven through that day had a long history of mining and forestry, way back in the olden days. Apparently, there was a bad rock slide, a real bad one. Several carts and carriages went off the road, and nearly a dozen people died. It happened only a few kilometers off where the modern highway is today. They say there was only one survivor. According to what I read, the workers were not able to double back and had to traverse the unsafe passage through the mountains despite knowing the high risk. My blood ran cold. I looked at a map of where the general area of the supposed passage had been before it was lost to time. My hands were shaking. I loaded up a satellite map of the area and traced my way to what was described. I zoomed in, and somehow I just knew. That was it, the faint outline of a track in the mountains only a few kilometers from the main road. It was the road I had seen in that dream. The road where I had driven off the edge of the cliff, a place where I'd never been. The place where those pioneers met that same fate so long ago. I don't like to drive anymore.